Welcome. Welcome to our virtual Gallier gathering. We are the Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses. I am Dr. Anastasia Scott, Director of Educational Programming. Gallier gatherings are being offered to you in this free virtual platform. If you like our programming, please become a member. Membership has its perks. If you are not a Louisiana or New Orleans resident, you can take advantage of the North American Reciprocal Museum Association, where you can receive membership benefits with museums and cultural institutions across the United States, Canada, Bermuda, El Salvador, and Mexico. Membership also helps with sponsoring programs such as this. 2021 is our 140th anniversary of the Women's Exchange, our owner and operator of our museums, and the 50th anniversary of the museum. Please join us in celebrating our anniversary by becoming a member. If you are impacted financially by COVID-19, we are offering a student membership of $25. If you join now, your membership is good through April 2022. If you wish to support us in other ways, we have our upcoming virtual spring fundraiser, Wine Fete, taking place later this month on April 30th. It's a virtual wine and cheese party with a silent auction that kicks off this Friday, April 16th. But you can purchase raffle tickets now to enter a chance to win a $1,000 wine gift card. Please visit our website for more details. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses, managed by the Women's Exchange, aims to maintain and preserve the architecture and decorative arts of the home so they may act as a microcosm of life during the 19th and 20th centuries to inspire educational experiences and discourse around our collective past and its contribution to the culture of New Orleans. At the end of each Gallier gathering is a survey we send out asking for your feedback. Please know that we read your feedback and try to make this content as relevant as we can. So please fill out the survey at the end of each Gallier gathering. Your feedback is valuable. In tonight's program, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary of the museums and Preservation Month by having our curator, Katie Burlison, and the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans' Executive Director, Danielle Del Sol, both of them will be talking about the preservation movement in New Orleans and what our owner and operating organization, the Women's Exchange, has done to preserve our two historic homes throughout the years. Katie Burlison is curator at the Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses since 2017. A native of Mobile, Alabama, she holds a BA in French from the University of Virginia and an MA in the History of Decorative Arts, Design, and Culture from the Bard Graduate Center in New York. Katie is passionate about historic preservation, art, and architectural history, and the 19th century history of New Orleans. In addition to maintaining the museum's two historic houses, she has curated several exhibits at the Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses and elsewhere on such topics as Newcomb pottery, motherhood in 19th century, the French Opera House, and Acadian sculptor Pierre-Joseph Landry. Outside of her museum work, Katie enjoys spending time with her family and traveling. Danielle Del Sol is the Executive Director, of course, of the Preservation Research Center of New Orleans. She was named Executive Director in February 2018 and is the fourth director in the organization's 47-year history. She served for 7 years before that as editor of Preservation in Print, the monthly magazine of the PRC. She is an adjunct lecturer in the Master of Preservation Studies program at Tulane University, of which she is also an alumna. She lives uptown New Orleans with her husband and 2 daughters in a 1905 Camelback shotgun that the couple restored in 2015. So a few housekeeping rules or ground rules for us. This talk will be recorded and available for viewing in 24 hours on our YouTube channel and website. Please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss out on any future recorded programming. If you have any questions at any point during the lecture, please save them until the end or submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So, without further ado, I present to you Mrs. Danielle Del Sol and later Mrs. Katie Burlison.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. That was great. Good evening, everyone. I really appreciate you all being here tonight, and it was an honor to be asked to be a part of this program. So thank you so much to Katie and Anastasia for including me. As Anastasia just said, I have been the executive director at the PRC for 3 years now and have been with the organization for 10 years as a whole. And so I'm honored to represent the PRC tonight in this program. I want to give a very quick presentation because the real pleasure tonight is going to be watching Katie's presentation. But I thought I would kind of set her up by giving a little bit of context as to the women's movement and where it sat with all the other preservation that was happening specifically from women. And I'm focusing this on women specifically because I feel very strongly that the historic preservation in this country would not exist were it not for women's participation, women's leadership, and their own self-empowerment to make preservation happen. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can get started with my presentation. For those of you who might not know who this dynamic trio is, this is actually in the center is Mary Lou Kristovich, and to her left is Rulhak Toledano, and then Betsy Swanson is on her other side. And this is the team that were responsible for the first Friends of the Cabildo architecture series book that was focused on the Lower Garden District. And so they're just a wonderful example of women, fiery women who made history and led to the preservation of many, many historic structures in New Orleans. But I'm going to start more grand. I'm going to talk more about the national movement first. So like I said, without women, would there be historic preservation in the United States? It's also a fair question to ask, whether historic preservation, which began first as a hyper-local organic movement and later became academic and a professional field, could have been brought forth at any other time. What's amazing to me about the official beginning of the historic preservation movement in the United States, which is largely attributed to this woman here on the left, Anne Pamela Cunningham, who in the mid-19th century, so from the 1840s and 50s, led a relentless pursuit to save Mount Vernon, so George Washington's home. This happened before women's suffrage. This happened almost a century before women's suffrage. And yet, Anne Pamela Cunningham and many women like her across the country were fearless and relentless and unapologetic about their efforts to pursue sites of historic significance in their towns all over the country. It's really a very common story that you will go to any city or any small town, and when you learn about historic sites in that town or in that place, so many of them were saved due to the diligence and hard work of women. And that's no coincidence. I'm not going to get into why I think it's particularly important that women led this charge. You know, it's not, I don't want to get into, you know, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but women, you know, maybe intrinsically some women understand that there are some things more important than financial gain. And in terms of our history and recognizing where we come from and how that shapes where we're going, perhaps, you know, a women's intuition has more to do with that. I don't know, that could be all, you know, silliness. So I'm not even going to go there, but there is something that has, you know, led to this being a largely women-led effort. And even in major cities, Denver, Miami, you learn the stories of these cities' salvations, the salvations of their downtown, their historic sites, and it's always women. So it's fascinating. Some of the sites, like Mount Vernon, were grand. And whenever celebrities were involved, it really helped the preservation movement because they help bring, you know, these hyper-local issues to the forefront. And so in New York City, of course, Jackie Onassis was really vocal in helping to save several really incredible landmarks, such as the Grand Central Terminal and St. Bartholomew's Church. And then the other woman pictured here is, of course, Ada Louise Huxtable, who was a renowned architecture critic for the New York Times and other places. She was the first person to win the Pulitzer Prize writing about architecture, and her outspoken editorials that really did not mince words really led to the preservation, and it was advocacy that led to the preservation of many really important sites in New York City. So these are powerful women who are using their influence in different ways to preserve places they care about. So they were famous, you know, maybe to start with, or Ada Louise became famous through her writing. Jane Jacobs was not famous, but she became famous because of her experiences just as a citizen in Greenwich Village. And she began to write about what she learned from the city, about urban life, about life on the street, and how those things were being negatively impacted, nay, destroyed by urban renewal policies that were in her hyper-local neighborhood that were being promulgated by Robert Moses. And so Jane Jacobs is, of course, known internationally. She's almost a household name because of her passion for historic preservation and quality of life in historic neighborhoods. And our world is all the richer for her efforts. So here in New Orleans, it was the same thing. That was national, but here in New Orleans, we had a number of incredibly important women who helped preserve New Orleans, the historic buildings, even at times when many other people did not see the value in those historic places. Grace King is a name that many of us know. She lived from 1870 to 1920, and she was a novelist and historian who was a devoted champion of Creole life and Creole culture. And she brought this culture to the world through her writings, both kind of histories and chronicles, but also fiction. And she was an active member of the Louisiana Historical Society and also a founder of the Les Petites Salons. I mention this because it's important, because these sorts of salons still exist to this day. They're for women. They're gathering places for socialization and for learning and for brainstorming. And salons such as Les Petites and others that came along really led to the proliferation of preservation in many ways that I think that would be a fascinating research paper into itself. Elizabeth Werlein was known as the mayor of the French Quarter in her lifetime. She was unapologetic, unabashed, a complete powerhouse. Just as a person, she was also completely fearless. She was one of the first women to fly in an air balloon. She learned how to fly a plane and became a licensed pilot. She was the president of the Louisiana League of Women Voters. She was just a force. And she believed that the French Quarter, the homes in the French Quarter were true artistry that deserved to be preserved forever. And this was at a time when the majority of people in the city considered the French Quarter to be a sort of ethnic slum. But she was relentless about her pursuits to preserve the French Quarter, the tout ensemble of the French Quarter. And it was because of her and her efforts that the Vieux-Carré Commission was established in the state legislature, the Louisiana legislature. So it's part of our state law that the VCC exists. And then later, she also helped found the VC-Pora. So her efforts have led to untold amounts of preservation, and the fact that we have a French Quarter today that is our most beloved jewel of the city, our original city, that it's still here thanks to her efforts. And I just love this painting. I think it's so beautiful. It was done for the 300th anniversary of the city. And this is a plaque that's on her home commemorating her good work. Martha Gilmore Robinson is another woman of incredible note. She was a co-founder of the Louisiana Landmark Society, and her efforts through her work with Louisiana Landmark Society led to the salvation of Gallier Hall, which of course at that time was slated for demolition because people thought that the new modern city hall was much superior and we didn't need the old Gallier Hall anymore. And can you imagine how sad it would be to not have Gallier Hall, where Rex and Zulu toasts the mayor every Mardi Gras and so many other wonderful events happen. Her efforts also led to the salvation of the Chalmette battlefield. They saved that site from industrial development. And it is said that Martha's mere presence in the room was so intimidating that politicians would just do what she said so they didn't have to deal with her. And I love hearing about that kind of chutzpah. Mary Louise Kristovich is a woman that we lost recently, but she was also just a dynamic powerhouse. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, she was the original author behind the New Orleans architecture series with Ruhlhock Toledano. And I've heard a story that I just love, that she and Ruhlhock and Betsy all had young kids, and they used to pile the kids in their convertible and just drive around neighborhoods taking pictures of blighted buildings that they wanted to save. And they felt that this communication effort, this effort to publish books, this was the best way to raise awareness for saving buildings. And they were right. This series, which now has, I think, 9 volumes, maybe 8 or 9, is invaluable and is a complete resource. I use it almost every day. And so her insight in thinking up this series of books, which others carried on after she stopped writing them, was just incredible. She also helped found Save Our Cemeteries. She served on many boards of museums, and she helped found the PRC. So she had her hand in so many things related to historic preservation, history in the city of New Orleans, and we will always miss her. I want to mention some contemporaries as well, in addition to Mary Lou, who deserve recognition. And the reason that I really wanted to show the breadth of this is because preservation means different things, and how we preserve things and what we preserve can manifest in many different ways. So I want to start from left. Louise Martin was the founder of Felicity Redevelopment, and they saved many houses in Central City from demolition, having to move many of them, restore many of them. And that's kind of traditional preservation work, but it was really important work. And Louise also passed away a few years ago, and we miss her. Anne Masson is a treasure. She is a historian who lives and breathes the French Quarter. She, of course, has been very involved in Hermann-Grima and Gallier houses, Beauregard Kai's house. She's a professor at Tulane. There's just not enough good things that could be said about Anne, but her approach is as a writer, as an educator, and as an activist, and it has been a very successful one indeed. Beverly McKenna, who is in the middle, is an incredible woman as well. She runs the Free People of Color Museum as well as the McKenna Museum. And they are beautifully curated exhibits that really show insight into the African American and free people of color, their impact on the city, their incredible roots and impact in this city. And she has also supported business owners on Bayou Road, especially in these hard times, giving low interest rent and been an incubator for women, especially to start their own businesses. And so that in and of itself is fostering community. That is preservation of current culture, of current life. And that is so important. Camille Strawn is an attorney who helped, who's I think is still on the board of Felicity Redevelopment and has been on the board of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and really looked at building preservation from a legal standpoint, which is incredibly important and can never be discounted. And then finally on this page is Gretchen Bradford, who we at the PRC have had the distinct pleasure of working with lately, as thanks to her tireless efforts to get Pontchartrain Park put on the National Register of Historic Places. And after two failed attempts, we finally were able to work with Gretchen this last time, and we were able to be successful and get Pontchartrain Park on the National Register. I would also like to argue that our mayor, Latoya Cantrell, is a great preservationist. Without her, Broadmoor may have been abandoned for green space. And we all know what a wonderful historic neighborhood that is. And she was actually recognized for her efforts in preservation by the National Trust a few years after the storm. I think it was 2008 or 2009. And I think we're very lucky to have a mayor who is so preservation minded. Then where would I be if I didn't bring up Patty Gay, who was, of course, the 37-year leader of the PRC and who did untold amounts of good in our community through many programs at the PRC for so many years. Patty lived and breathed preservation. She still does, even though she's not at the helm anymore. It's her passion, it's her life, and everyone knew it. And there was a power to that, that when Patty was in the room, you wanted to talk to her about 1,000 things because she's so passionate about our city's history and our built environment here. So I wanted to mention in terms of women leadership, these are all women leaders that I've mentioned, but the PRC would not exist if it were not for women leadership, as we were founded by the Junior League of New Orleans. It started with Junior League members who were really passionate about rampant demolitions they were seeing across the city in the mid 20th century. So they organized these bus tours called Building Watchers tours, where they would go around and they would note blighted buildings and say, watch this, it's either going to get torn down by a speculative developer or someone might save it. Why don't one of you save it? And so these Building Watchers tours were so powerful. People really were so invested in them that they decided that there needed to be an organization to help preserve our city's neighborhoods and empower people in a way that wasn't just focused on landmarks like Louisiana Landmarks, which was founded before the PRC, but really could empower people with information to save their homes and advocate for their neighborhoods. And so they granted the PRC 3 years of operating expenses to pay for our first executive director, who was Larry Schmidt, in 1974. And things snowballed from there, and PRC was self-sufficient after that time. But were it not for the Junior League, we would not exist. This is from one of the first issues of Preservation in Print, which was called Preservation Press back in the day, and this was from 1975. So the magazine is almost as old as the organization itself. I want to just kind of talk to you really quickly as I close about what the PRC has always been about. And the PRC has always been about, like I said, empowering people to realize the change that they want to see in their community, or fix up their home, or learn more about their home, or learn more about rehabbing buildings at large. We really have always strived to reach all sectors of the community. And that was true in 1975, and it's absolutely still true today. We've had many, many programs through the years to accomplish our mission, which actually evolved in 2018 when we passed a new strategic plan. So our mission used to be the preservation, restoration, or revitalization of New Orleans historic architecture and neighborhoods. Today, it is the preservation of New Orleans historic architecture, neighborhoods, and cultural identity, because we know that preservation is about more than buildings. It's about people. It's about way of life. It's about the history. Yes, that's embedded in those walls, but that's also living in our neighborhoods. And so these are just a few examples of some of the things that we've done through the years. Of course, Preservation in Print is still very active today. We also publish books and have great social media channels to really get the word out. We believe so strongly that people might not realize that they're preservationists, but when you start, if you tell them about issues they care about, suddenly they realize, oh, I do care about preservation. I just didn't realize it was called that. We used to have a salvage store where people could buy things after Katrina. Our programs have really evolved over time to meet community needs. Rebuilding Together, we've helped low-income homeowners with free home repairs for decades now. Our Operation Comeback program, we have fixed houses through the years, and these are some of our current programs. So our Revival Grants program helps low-income homeowners with free HDLC violation remediation. We still, of course, have our wonderful magazine. We have an active easement program that's also decades old. This building here is one of our easements, 419 Carondelet Street. We have over 140 that we are tasked with keeping safe in perpetuity forever. We have a very active advocacy department, and that's absolutely part of our mission. We monitor demolitions, we advocate for good policy that supports preservation initiatives, and we're educators. We hold classes, workshops, we do history publications. We really want to empower people with knowledge so that they can fix their own home, buy a home, buy many properties if they want. Be a realtor who's informed about what they're selling. We really want to touch people at every level to empower them to save the places that they care about the most. Some other fun things that we do: we sell great merchandise, so check it out on our website, prcno.org. We do documentation. This is a great before and after from our Operation Comeback days. This is General Taylor Street in Uptown, those of you who don't recognize the block. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have at the end. But for now, for the real meat of the program, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Burlison for her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's get my screen share. Okay, hi everybody. So I'm Katie Burlison. I'm the curator at the Hermann-Grima Gallier Historic Houses. I'm not quite used to this, doing the presentations on Zoom where I don't see everybody's faces. So just forgive me, but I'm going to do my best. I titled my presentation "Scores of Big and Little Jobs." And you will see throughout the presentation how many different types of things have gone on at the both Hermann-Grima and Gallier House over the years, in terms of the buildings and the preservation of, not only the preservation of the buildings, but stories and all kinds of artifacts and things, and then actually even preserving our own history of our restoration efforts. So on February 2nd, 1971, the ladies of the Women's Exchange, formerly the Christian Women's Exchange, opened the 1831 Hermann-Grima House doors to the public as a museum. 50 years later, our organization still owns and operates the Hermann-Grima House, and now also the Gallier House as an historic house museum. As early as 1963, leaders of the exchange recognized the importance of restoring and preserving the Hermann-Grima House, and over the next decade would update its mission from being a place where working women could live at modest rates to one focused on preservation, education, and interpretation of its valuable historic property. With the help of volunteers from the exchange's membership, the colonial dames, local scholars, architectural historians, and craftspeople, over the past half century, Hermann-Grima and Gallier have thrived as centers of study for preservation and life in 19th century New Orleans. So in this picture, we're actually going through a whole bunch of slides right now that we've collected over the years. I'm trying to gather them all in one spot and have them scanned. And in the spirit of cooperation, we have borrowed a big slide scanner from the VCC Foundation. On the right is an image of a woman named Jolie Ann, and she's got pain perdu, or lost bread, that she prepared in the Hermann-Grima hearth kitchen. So the New Orleans Christian Women's Exchange was part of a larger women's exchange movement, and it was the first one in the Deep South. most didn't have actually Christian in their name. So I think we might have been the only one that had Christian in our name. But that again would change later. In 1999, the Christian was dropped from the name. So we were founded in 1881, and you'll see the call to action that was published in the Daily Picayune, March 27th, 1881. And she says that, let's see, that if we are properly informed, there's a great desire among many of our best people to have an efficient organization of ladies, ready and willing to do whatever their hearts and hands may find to do for the encouragement, improvement, and reclamation of their own sex, thereby keeping pace with our noble Christian men and be trained into suitable life companions for the same. So originally, when the organization was founded, it was, and it still is, for women by women. It was the first association organized and chartered in the city of New Orleans by women for women. But and they mentioned men in this part, there was at the very beginning, the women had to have their husband's signatures to authorize the charter. So about 40 ladies showed up for the first meeting after this call was put out. And let's see, and then they originally moved into this building that you see on the right. That is, it's Lafayette Square. So the first women's exchange was this building on the corner, that the arrows, it's behind these lights, but this was on South Street facing Lafayette Square. So the women's exchange the New Orleans Women's Exchange were predominantly upper class, wealthy, and all white women. Beth Willinger, who's a historian who has written a lot about the Women's Exchange in New Orleans, calls them the noblesse oblige, which is, as most of you probably know, is wealthy people who feel like it's their duty to help out the poor. But it also had kind of a caveat in this, which is helping those who want to help themselves. So the initial supporters included Paul Tulane, who started Tulane University, was actually founded right within like a month of the Women's Exchange. So let's see. So this is the original mission, or in the charter, this is the original platform: encouragement, improvement, and reclamation. To, you see, provide ways and means for the encouragement and relief of our impoverished women who cannot be crushed into beggary and sin. A means of improvement, so they're educating them to be artistic workers, and then also the Christian aspect is listed in the third part of the platform. So as you see, this was the beginning of the organization, was all about helping impoverished women. It was also it ended up being a lot of more unmarried or women who they were criticized a bit early on, because it was more like they were just wanting to help. Some people criticized them for wanting to help just women who were widows from the Civil War, so not necessarily women who had been poor for a long time, but maybe people they had known in their own lives who had previously been wealthy and then lost their husbands and lost any means to support themselves. So they had they had decorative arts classes in the early building that I just showed you. The Southern Art Union actually wanted to merge, but they rejected their offer to merge, but they still held classes and had like art needlework and decorative pottery painting and all those things that were really popular in the late 19th century in the middle and upper class for middle and upper class women. So women were able to needy women were able to make things and then bring them, they called it handiwork, and were able to sell them in the exchange shop. So in the Times-Picayune, and it went all the way till the shop still is in existence today, but they always had items from needy women that they made. The shop took 10%, and the women had to pay $2 a year. Any of the consigners had to pay $2 a year for kind of like their dues to cover the fees associated. They also had a boarding house that they opened. And then, and on the right here in my picture, in my slide, you see one of the early shop images once the shop moved to the 818 St. Louis next door to the Hermann-Grima house in 1946. In a Times-Picayune article in 1946 entitled 65 Years of Good Works, they talk about visit to the shop is interesting mostly to see the furniture, jewelry, collector's items, antiques, baby clothes, etc. on display. And one woman, Miss Victoria Lagardère, who's a member, said, "We have all kinds of handwork for sale, and any woman of faith may consign her handwork to the exchange to be sold, or she may leave silver dishes, bric-a-brac, or heirlooms on consignment." So in addition to having items that women had made to sell, they also had kind of family heirlooms, which again, kind of, it refers to these women who might have been from wealthier families or had been wealthy before that fell into a certain amount of poverty. So let's see. And then the residents of the Women's Exchange, it was the boarding house. And then in 1924, they purchased the Hermann-Grima house. And the ad that's in the middle top up here is an ad for rooms for rent. And it advertises it as, they advertise it as an 18th century house, which is incorrect. It's 19th century. So, oops. So like I said, while I'm going to focus on the preservation efforts, I'm giving you a little bit of a background on the boarding house, but I'm going to focus on the preservation efforts. If you'd like to learn more about the boarding house time period, then I encourage you to come take a tour at the house. We do have some artifacts out that are documents related to that, as well as one of the rooms in the upstairs, the Dauphine Street side on St. Louis, that is furnished as it was in the mid 20th century when a woman named Mrs. Washburn lived there. So you can come see a little bit of old and new, or new-ish. It's now 80 years old in that room. But so in 1924, the Christian Women's Exchange purchased 818 and 820 St. Louis. 820 is what we now know as the Hermann-Grima house. It was called the Grima residence. They purchased the house, the slave quarters behind it, which also had a kitchen and some other workrooms on the first floor, a stable, which is 818. You can see that in the left side of this picture, past the palm tree. And they purchased it from the SPCA. So the Grima family had lived there. The Hermans had lived there. It was built in 1831. Hermans lived there from 1831 to 1844. And then the Grima family, Felix Grima and his family, lived there from 1844 until 1921. So after the youngest, or the last Grima to move out of the house, actually sold it to the Louisiana chapter of the SPCA. They were going to use it as their headquarters, the Louisiana headquarters, and then it ended up, they never did do anything with it. So the women, there's a lot that went on with them trying to get the funding together and everything, but some wealthy women who were the founders were able to get together the $17,500 for purchasing the house. And they were this was going to be another boarding house used for unmarried employed women to rent rooms at a low rate. So sometimes I say single women, but technically there were a lot of them that were actually widows. So I guess unmarried or widowed. So in 1972, a new mission was adopted for the Christian Women's Exchange. Now, there's a few reasons for the shift in the mission. One was Hurricane Betsy happened in 1965, and a lot of damage was done to the Grima residence, as they called it. The roof was damaged. There was flooding they had made the third floor, which had been the attic, into 6 different rental rooms and a small bathroom. And that had all been, there were leaks in the roof and roof damage, and then the slave quarter building was also rental rooms, and that had also been damaged. So they were kind of at a turning point where they had so much money they needed to spend on it, and they thought it just made them think about where they wanted to go from where they wanted to go forward. And another reason they wanted to reconsider the mission was because of the changing social norms around women living alone and unchaperoned. So a lot of younger unmarried, younger single women started moving in and renting rooms at the house. And there are some notes that are some records of complaints for some of the from some of the exchange members and older women who were living in the house, saying that they weren't quite loving how this, younger stock of ladies were coming in and living and going out to dinner and coming back late and things like that. So the atmosphere in the house was definitely changing a little bit. And also in some records, we have instances where people were not able to stay there any longer, kicked out for not being of good moral standing. So I'll just leave that one there. So also tourists and preservationists who were coming to the French Quarter, just the French Quarter in general, kind of how Danielle spoke about, like the 60s and 70s were a real turning point in preservation in New Orleans. People started coming here as tourists, and they really enjoyed the old buildings and seeing all the old buildings. And so people wanted to see the Hermann-Grima house, and they started asking if they could look around inside and things like that. So they thought that they really, people were interested in it for its historical importance. So in 1972, they adopted a new mission, which was what you see on the screen here, to develop and maintain the historic Hermann-Grima house by collecting, preserving, and interpreting aspects of life and history in New Orleans during the period 1830 to 1860. Now, as Anastasia mentioned in the beginning, our mission has been updated since then, and we actually just adopted the new one that she read out. So we're going forward into the 21st century with a version of what we had, also focused on preservation, education, and inspiring discourse about the history of New Orleans in the 19th and 20th century. So we also had, at that time, they met and recruited and kind of just befriended some allies in the community, including family members, the women members in the board, other women's groups, including the Colonial Dames, the New Orleans Town Gardeners, who continue to support us today, and other museums and professionals around the country. So throughout the period of restoration of the 1970s on, there was a lot of going back and forth. The board would go back and forth to historic sites around the country. I know for the kitchen, they had gone to see the Alamo and Williamsburg and different places, old Sturbridge Village in Vermont, and reading about some of these places. Some of them I still haven't been to that I really want to go to, but I just wanted to point out this is the state's item from this is an article from the state's item that has it's from the 70s, and it's got Louise Martin in there. Actually, Danielle, I think she was the first employee of the Hermann-Grima house. I was reading a bunch about it, and I think she was either the first employee period or maybe one of the first full-time employees. But anyway, so it all kind of overlaps within our world. And also early on, they had requested, since the Junior League was so involved in this kind of mission, they also requested volunteers from the Junior League. So they had 2 volunteers from the Junior League who were some of the first people helping out at the house. So this is just around this time period when the restoration and research and the house opened, they were really getting a lot of press. So you'll see a lot of in the newspaper, there's a lot of articles, just lifestyle kind of articles and things about the house and its historic importance. So I just wanted to show y'all some of the examples of some kind of documents that are used to research historic properties. And these are some I put together for another presentation, but I think they're really helpful for just getting an idea of what the property line is at Hermann-Grima House. So these are the Sanborn insurance maps. So when you're looking back, also, you know, it aids in the research, but also just in the preservation. If you want to bring something back to what it was to a certain period of time, then this is where you can look and see, okay, so where the dotted line is on this, on the red line that I made, the dotted line is actually currently a brick wall, but it wasn't there originally. So from the 1876, when you can see this property goes all the way down. This is our current property with the little dotted outline, but it actually, the Herman's property went all the way back to Conti. So if you just take out that dotted line and go all the way back to Conti Street. So you can find these online at the Historic New Orleans Collection. It has a great resource called the Collins D-Ball Vieux Carré Digital Survey, and also the Vieux Carré Virtual Library, which is through the VCC Foundation. And these are some great resources for anybody who's looking to research any property in the French Quarter particularly. So, and then this shows actually the solid line that I drew there is, this is the property now. And so between 1876 and 1896, the property was divided up. So, and you can see the building that says tenements right there was actually the building that was where the enslaved people it was originally built for enslaved people to live in, and then the workrooms on the first floor. So those were labeled as tenements. So that was also, you know, that went kind of into like the, you know, early 20th century. A lot of the, like the Pontalba buildings and things were saved by William Irby, and I won't even get into him because he's a whole other story. But he owned a lot of the historic properties in the French Quarter and was responsible for saving them. And he donated them to a lot of organizations that were museums and people that were interested in saving them and preserving them. Oops. So the wall on the other side of the wall on Conti Street now is Broussard's restaurant. So they actually have some weddings in our courtyard sometimes, and have they cater and they have weddings. So another source that you can look at that the women of the Christian Women's Exchange used to research in the 70s were the building contracts for 820 St. Louis. So the two-story brick dwelling house on the left is the main house, or the mansion, or the owner's house. People call it a lot of different things, but basically we have like a complex, and we have several, the main house and then several dependencies. This house, the cost on the building contract was $15,205. So it's worth a little bit more than that now, but that was February 1831 when the contract was signed. And on the right is the largest dependency. This is a 3-story brick house, and that one was $5,000. And this is the upstairs, the second and third floor were used to house the enslaved people there. And then the first floor is a wine room, a scullery or washroom, a hearth kitchen, and an ironing room. So those are all mentioned in the original building contract. And so when the restoration was done, all the research and archaeology and everything, they ended up, there was a wall that was that it had been opened up that they added back, because it was only 3 rooms down there when the Women's Exchange purchased it. So let's see. Okay. Oh, I just will mention a few of the materials that were used, just because it's kind of interesting to think about that in the 19th century. So there's from all over the country, you've got in world, Philadelphia or Baltimore brick. They mentioned, and these are all mentioned in the building contract, the best English or Welsh slate, copper gutters, cypress wood, seasoned white pine, Flemish bond, and mahogany. So the staircase railing, banisters, mahogany. And then this base is granite as well. So overall, the house is American, is neoclassical, sorry, federal, neoclassical, American federal, American, yes, federal, it's American. And then, but it has some Creole adaptations, cabinets on the ends, and then the balconies here, which are really for enjoying the New Orleans weather, and also walking underneath when you're trying to enter the house, or along the sidewalk to protect yourself from the New Orleans weather. So some of the people that I mentioned before that we reached out to, that the Women's Exchange reached out to originally to fundraise, were the members and their families, who obviously were wealthy. The National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Louisiana. There's a lot of different versions of the colonial dames, but this is the one that's our colonial dames that support us. So we're an affiliated house. We're not owned by the dames, but we are affiliated with them. So they early on had offered to furnish the parlor and the hall. And so that was a huge deal, because all that involved like buying antique furniture and draperies and all kinds of things. So carpet, the town gardeners offered to research and do the planting pay for the planting for the courtyard. So they did research on the original, what it would have originally looked like in the garden. Also, somebody that was really, I know Danielle didn't mention this person, she was more gardening, but Sue Turner was from Baton Rouge, as she's a philanthropist and preservationist, and did a lot of work with gardens. And so she was one of our, she wrote this plan for the history of the garden, so the courtyard. We also had grants from the National Trust for Historic Preservation early on, and the state of Louisiana. And then also the women, just in some of it's in the histories and the minutes and things, they start to realize that, like, wow, this is a lot of work, and this is going to cost us a lot of money, and we're going to need to keep money coming in somehow. So they ended up starting this fundraiser. They thought, we need a yearly fundraiser, because that's what everybody. So they started this party called the Soiree, which doesn't happen anymore, but where they did kind of like a, living history with the outfits and costumes and things like that. So there's actually people my age I know who were like kids at that, when it was going on, and they remember wearing some of these kind of ridiculous outfits. Like my mom made me wear this thing. So that was our early fundraiser. Now we've evolved past the Soiree, and we've got some other great things going on, like the one on April 30th that Anastasia spoke about. Our first grant was $15,000 from the Libby Dufour Foundation, and that was very exciting. So, and that's all like in bold and things, and all in our history notes. So it's exciting for us. Let's see. So this is where my title came from. An address that was made by former president and then restoration chairman Shingo Woodward in 1971. She said, we had committee meetings. We had many fruit and cheese lunch. We had many a fruit and cheese lunch from an ice chest on hot summer days, and we worked. It was contagious, for we had the support of so many professionals and a magnificent building to bring back to its original elegance. Some of us have done research, some supervised workmen, others removed paint from transoms, brought lunch, handled accounts, weeded the flower beds, kept records, dusted old files, scores of big and little jobs. So it sounds like about what we have one person who does all that now. So, no, women, more people are working now, and it is just in general, you find at this point in the 70s, a lot of the wealthier women, that it was a lot of volunteering, like the junior league was almost more like a job, and this was more like a job for them. So they were spending a lot of time And just like Danielle said, there were probably some kids hanging around while they were doing these jobs. Maybe they're getting their sons to help them with the weeding and things. So, and it is in fact reflected in the minutes in the summer of 1970 that board members had worked on various projects. Anne Haddow supervised the scraping of paint on transoms. Avery Bassett and a group oiled iron cooking pots. Frances Shilstone headed a committee to catalog gifts for the kitchen. Lynn Farwell became expert in 1830 furnishings, and Helen Shaw washed the old mosquito bar and bedspreads. So these are the kind of things that, you know, when you have people extra hands to do them, it's really great. So they also consulted experts who gave generously of their time and talent, and board members also gave generously of their money. So these are the goals that were set in 1972. So besides the things that I just read you, these were the things they were planning to do in 1972 and 1973, which is a lot. And they actually ended up doing a lot of these in that time period. They did not restore the mansion, the exterior painting. That actually went through some, it was a little bit controversial through the VCC about the way that the front of the house was painted, but everything worked out in the end. The rental rooms were not ended until 1975. The correcting the plaque in front of the house was actually just taking off. It had said Dr. Samuel Herman originally. Not sure what that was all about, and doing the informational booklet for guides. So I mentioned Avery Bassett. I just want to, she is pictured in this lower left picture with Lynette Tramontana, an archaeologist who did an early dig there. Avery Bassett was, they ended up making a scroll that they printed up, the Women's Exchange did for her, and called her the Potager Princess. So we actually recently, the slide you see here, the image of Avery and Lynette, was actually from a whole bunch of notebooks of slides that Avery's family gave us, and she left in her estate for us. She died a couple years ago and was really great. She was very important, like pivotal. We could not have done the early restoration and archaeological digs and anything without her. In fact, somebody called from there, somebody nationally actually called us asking for a national, thinking Avery Bassett was the national expert in historic kitchens. So she really got, people got to know her around the country from her traveling around and doing all kinds of research. So, and I had worked with her on another, she was also on the board of the State Museum, and just was really, really pivotal in getting the kitchen done accurately. So, and she oiled the iron pots. So these are all the archaeological digs that were done at the Hermann-Grima house. So several from UNO, at least one from there's some at the Gallier house from Tulane before we owned it. But so from 1974 up until 1993, there were nine archaeological digs done. So, and the pictures are some of the things that were found in these digs that I just took these pictures recently. So they're packaged up, and kind of trying to figure out where I can display them now. But the shell-edged wares is the ceramics, and then these old pieces of hardware. We're actually having an exhibit coming up on blacksmiths, and I'm going to use these in that exhibit to show some of the work that was done in the 19th century. So if you see these kind of things now on houses, that's, these are the real 19th century ones that they're trying to imitate, or you can go to Ricca's and buy them or the bank. And then this brass shingle here was Alfred Grima's shingle from when he was living at the house and he was an attorney. This was actually found in one of the archaeological digs. So that's pretty cool. It's been cleaned up. Let's see. So I mentioned the courtyard research and restoration. This is the one on the left is from, I think that one's from like the 1930s. You'll notice now we have the doors are painted like a dark gray color, which is what they realized, later on after doing all the paint analysis and things. So, and they're also, you can see on this, on the picture on the left, there's the stairwell that looks kind of like a fire escape, but I think that's actually how some of the women, the boarders, got up to their second and third floor rooms. The windows along the top are the two on the left. The one on the left was a bathroom. That's currently storage, but then all up in the attic, they made 6 rooms, as I mentioned, when they opened it as a boarding house, made 6 rental rooms up there. The one in the middle is from the 1970s. That's one of the early plantings. The big magnolia tree, which is not there anymore. On the right is a picture that I took just within the last couple years after we had the flagstones cleaned. So I was really impressed how well it looked afterwards. And so I took a bunch of pictures. Let's see. So in 1946, I mentioned that the article that was promoting the women's exchange shop and things in 1946, when the women's exchange, Christian women's exchange, moved the shop from Royal Street to St. Louis, the courtyard and hearth kitchen had already been established as a tea room called the Courtyard Kitchen. And in that Times-Picayune article, they talk about the space that lovers of old gardens revel in Grima houses, in the Grima house's flagstone patio, bricked up flower beds, mammoth iron cistern, huge magnolia trees, and gay vines climbing 3 stories high. So you can see with the magnolia tree that it provided a lot of shade. So that actually would have been a really nice place to kind of hang out and have some iced tea. And then this is another just continuation of some of the courtyard research and restoration. So the book on the left that's the one that I mentioned about Sue Turner had written the chapter called A Preservation Plan for the Hermann-Grima Courtyard. This was printed and published in 1996, edited by Shingo Menard, who was Shingo Woodward, who was the one I mentioned earlier that talked about all the jobs that had been done. And Samuel Wilson of Koch and Wilson, is an architect. He wrote the introduction to this. He was one of those. So when I said like people in the community that we got to help us and experts, they included architects like Samuel Wilson. Today I owe a debt of gratitude to Robbie Cangelosi because he's at Koch and Wilson and he answers my call whenever I call him and only sometimes makes me get a grant to pay him. So we still rely a lot on people's expertise and we have a great relationship with the community and still love inviting people back who worked there over the years. So like Robbie actually was working for Koch and Wilson early on in the 70s when they did the first work on the kitchen. So he comes back, he's got a longer institutional memory than anybody there, I think, because he's been working on this house and Gallier House for more than 30, 40 years. And in the middle, this is a plan from 2019 when we had some things replanted. You'll see they're based off of some historic plants. We've got kumquats, roses, satsumas, camellias, all kinds of things. So this is the plan of the courtyard looking out from the back of the house. And it's really nice. We do have some of the flagstones are kind of not really flat right now. So we're looking to get that worked on at some point. And then up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the cistern that was behind the buildings. That was right now it's just a recreation that was done in the 70s, exactly like the original one, but the original one had gotten all rotted basically, and they had to replace it. So it's just open in the back and we store garden tools and wood back there. So let's see. So here's some more of the kitchen. So not only do we, so there's the research, I've talked about some of that was done. The image, the black and white image here is the, it was actually used, the hearth kitchen was used as one of the rooms for the boarding as a, for a boarder. So they had, I guess in the winter, they were nice and warm, but probably nice and warm in the summer too, because there's not really much ventilation in that room for somebody while they were sleeping, I guess, without having the doors completely open, because these are just kind of the shutters. So up until the Civil War, enslaved cooks would have worked here for the Hermans and Grimas. And then after the Christian Women's Exchange purchased it, it was used for the courtyard kitchen and then for boarders later. And archaeological digs I mentioned in the 1970s. And the hearth, you see how it's up high on this one, like lifted up with that brick. So the research done, they found that it was actually lower on the ground. So in the picture on the right, you can see how that's, it's been lowered. And then these are some of our fabulous volunteers that come and cook from usually October to April. So they are going to be coming back in the fall. So the potager over here, these stew holes are really an interesting part of the kitchen, kind of my favorite thing. But we've got, you can put hot ashes under there or an open flame, and we've got grills over them that that flip upside down to go into the, you can adjust the heat, whether their grills are lower down or whether they're flipped up and raised up a little bit. So it's really neat. And then the one on the top right is just an example of the kinds of things that I turn into the PRC Commission for approval. So the it has these old, we had these old terrible track lights that we've been wanting to replace for a while. And I should have put a picture of it now, but we got those repaired replaced a couple years ago. And then, oops. Sorry, y'all. There we go. And so this is the kind of thing like in your application to the PRC Commission, if you're VCC, yeah, VCC. If you're trying to get do some work, you have to show them exactly what you're going to do. So we removed these old fixtures a few years ago, and a mason, Teddy Pierre, repaired the hearth, and then we put in some lighting just above the doors, facing out, and it's integrated LED lighting. So it's got a really small environmental impact. We're not going to have to keep replacing the light, the bulbs over and over, and which makes my job easier, less expenditure on that. And then it also doesn't disturb when you walk into the room. Now you don't see the lights. They're just behind you, kind of above you. So I like it that way. So in 1996, we acquired Gallier House from Tulane University, which was the home of architect James Gallier Jr. and his family. It had been owned after the Galliers. There were a few different owners, and then the Freeman family lived there, and then Freeman Foundation owned it. Tulane used it for their School of Architecture, or the School of Architecture owned it, but then that's a lot to run for an architecture school to also run a historic house. So we had kind of a detailed agreement over how we were gonna, we had to make sure that we were gonna be able to run the house and keep it up. So that was part of the agreement when we took it over from Tulane. So these are just a few of the important dates in the history. So I've already told you most of these. 1971, the house opened as a museum. Also, Hermann-Grima was put on the National Park Service, National Register of Historic Places. We entered the CWE ended the rental room program in 1975. And then in 1999, dropped the Christian and just became the Women's Exchange. So what do we preserve? So we preserve this. I was going back and forth with Danielle a little bit on this, because we preserve not only the buildings, but and they're important in preserving neighborhoods. We preserve not only architecture, which you can see the front door of Hermann-Grima House from 1907, 1963, and then 2021. So as we've learned things about the house, we can update them, or it's really kind of taking them back to the correct, what they looked like in the time period that we want to interpret. So here's more architecture. This is kind of what I do a lot is getting people to come and look at things and to fix them in the historically appropriate manner. So we had the sun hits Gallier House, the slave quarters at Gallier House really hard. So the decking was rotting. We had that repaired. And then this is after, looking down the other side after it was repaired and painted. And we have all the historic paint colors and things. We also preserve interior architecture and fabric, like building fabric. So which is basically the floors and the walls and things. So on the left is 1907. The middle is me looking at some flooring under a piece of rug on the under a piece of carpet, and then the right is Gallier House. So these are some of the architectural details. Oops, there's another. Put that one in there twice. This is the fireplace at Gallier House. So we have this marbling that, again, these are the important kind of fabric things. And then a skylight at Gallier House. That was one of James Gallier Jr.'s kind of little tricks that he was trying out to see if that would help with some ventilation and light. We have family portraits. The Grimas are the left is the Grimas, the middle is the Grimas, and the right is James Gallier Jr. portrait. We also take care of family objects and artifacts. This is some acid-free storage. The center is some Grima family silver, and on the right is a bedroom of an enslaved person at Gallier House. Now, almost 40% of the artifacts at Gallier House at Hermann-Grima are original to the families, either Hermann's or Grima's. And at Gallier, though, we only have a few things that are original. Anne Masson is actually one of the main people who put this house together, though, and she did exhaustive research on inventories and things from the French Quarter at the time. So another really important aspect of our preservation efforts is personal stories and traditions. So oral histories of Sam Wilson Jr., we have one, Lynn Farwell, former residents of the boarding house, who apparently one of them was Lynn Emery, who recently died. So I'm going to try to wish that we had one with her before, but and descendants of the families of the houses, music, cooking and dining, and mourning. The picture on the bottom is a woman from the l'Opera Creole who performed in Gallier House right before our French Opera House exhibit opening. And it was great to have them performing in that house, and that stand next to her was originally from the French Opera House. We have archival records, documents, slides, videos, photographs. So what is worth preserving? Who decides what to save? What is important enough and what is not? I kind of wanted to end with this because we recently were awarded a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And in the narrative, something that I wrote that I was proud of, because I think that it's kind of how we're going to help be a catalyst for this work and really carry it forward into the 21st century. So one of the themes of the grant project that we're doing is called Shifting Landscapes, and you'll be hearing about that a lot more in the future. Anastasia is the project director, but is that there's value to history and community in preserving the built environment and interstitial spaces of enslaved and free laborers in New Orleans. And it's really about, who's defining what is worth preserving. And over the past, 200 years, it's been maybe not, we haven't included everyone's voice. So I think now we're really trying to focus on including a diversity of voices and telling more diversity of stories, finding ways to tell stories about everyone who was in the New Orleans in the 19th century, not just, the Hermans, the Grimas, and the Galliers, but all the people who lived around them and worked for them, who they enslaved and who they paid. So, so that's something that's coming. Y'all will learn more about that project. And then just this is how the Vieux Carré Commission defines we're the purple rated buildings. So, so I use the Vieux Carré Commission's design guidelines to guide most all of my projects. And some people might find them onerous and a pain, but I find them very helpful because they give you a real clear way to direction to take your project in and clear guidance. So that's all. Thank you so much. Hope I didn't go too long.
Thank you so much, Katie. Wow. Both of you all, both Danielle and Katie, you all did a phenomenal job. I'm going to give the audience some time. I have comments, so I'll just begin with my comments. I do have questions, but I want you all to give the questions. So if you all don't mind, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature. I would use that to submit your questions at this time while I just make some opening comments while we wait on your questions. So Danielle, fearless, relentless, and unapologetic about these, what you said, hyper local organic preservation movements. So awesome. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that women were such a dynamic and critical force in the early historic preservation movement. I did not know that. So amazing. And then the salon, now just my like sort of opening question, is that the same thing as like, you know, it could be pronounced as saloon with 2 O's? Is that the same thing? Or is
No,
that
no, no.
things?
No, very different. Though alcohol may have been served in both. I don't know. But salons were more like literary clubs, you know, almost like a predecessor to book clubs. They'd get together for luncheons, they'd have garden talks, they'd have historians speak. And these sorts of clubs still exist. And so they're kind of, you know, you might call them, it's a derisive term, so I don't like ladies who lunch, but it is kind of, you know, women get dressed up and they go and they learn about something. It's a social activity, but it's also civic engagement.
Okay, thank you. Because I was like, wait, am I spelling it wrong?
No, the Petit Salon still exists on, you know,
Okay.
it's still, yeah, they're still here.
It's not a hair salon. It's which begs the question, did hair salons derive from that? We'll talk about that another thing because I'm a little confused.
Salon in French salon is French for room, you know, so it could be a room for various purposes.
Right, which why they have the distinguishing hair salon. Got it.
Right.
Got it. So if you have another question for Danielle, I'll just go ahead with the first question. So you all keep using that chat feature and I will ask your questions as they come. Danielle, what, if anything, is the PRC doing about the tearing down of houses all over town and replacing them with identical McMansions? There are 6 in a couple of block radius of my uptown home.
Me too. And so we might be neighbors, and it's very depressing. We fight each of these demolitions individually, and there are a handful of developers that are perpetrating most of these projects. And it's very standard. It's the same thing every time. It's a small house, or it's a house that's been a rental for a long time and so is in very poor shape. And the developer will tear it down. Sometimes they have permission, sometimes they don't. We had an issue on Cadiz Street last year where a developer basically went around the HDLC's denial of demolishing 2 historic homes by contacting safety and permits directly and getting someone on their staff to claim that the homes were in imminent danger of collapse, which they were not. And so it's kind of by any means necessary that these developers will do this because they stand to make just so much money. The real estate market is out of control right now. And so these McMansions, and you're right, they're lot line to lot line. They have this kind of faux historic Greek revival, very uncreative design to them, not to be, you know, a snob, but we are very blessed with these historic houses that have beautiful artistry, in their craftsmanship. And then here come these very cookie cutter homes that are being thrown up in the neighborhoods, and they all look the same. And they're selling for over $1 million a piece. And so when these developers are able, especially if the house is blighted, when they're able to buy a home for, $300,000 or $400,000, it's still worth tearing it down to them, because they can throw up a kind of, a new construction house for maybe $200,000, and then they get a really nice profit. It's really depressing, and it's really hard to fight with the real estate market because it's the market. And so, like I said, we are monitoring these all the time. We have eyes on the street. People send us, videos and pictures, but there's not a lot we can do. We're actually talking right now with people about trying to approach the state legislature. Unfortunately, our demolition fines that are levied by the city for illegal demolitions are really minimal. It's something like $10,000 if you illegally demolish a house without permission. So that is such a small number that any developer will just work that into their pro forma and do it anyways. And unfortunately, that is codified in the state legislature. So we'd have to go to the state to get that changed. But we are really passionate about trying to get that changed to a number that would really knock any developer's socks off, as an actual safeguard for our historic districts. Because right now it's just, it's a throwaway number for developers who are looking to sell a house for over $1 million. So that's a long and kind of sad answer to say that we're doing only as much as we can do at the moment, but it's a terrible trend. And like I said before, I'm seeing it in my neighborhood too. And it changes the character of the neighborhood when it happens enough. We're a city that has so much historic architecture that I think we take it for granted. But when it starts to disappear and starts getting replaced, suddenly, one day you're walking and you're just like, whoa, this feels totally different, and maybe not in a good way. So.
Wow. That was good. I didn't even know that. That is so interesting. So much. So let me just try to divide it up. Okay, going to Katie. Wow, someone lived in the open hearth kitchen. I couldn't imagine it. I was like, what? Someone lived there?
Yeah.
And then
I think that might be the room that Lynn Emery actually lived in. I have to look back at specifics, but I know, yeah.
Someone confirmed that it is.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so in the early sort of mission for the Christian Women's Exchange, I thought that was so inspiring. Encouragement, improvement, and reclamation. I thought that was great as well. So 2 questions I had for you, Katie, and then we'll actually go to one of the questions from the chat. But when I thought about like some of the earlier, when I thought about some of the sort of earlier goals, you remember you had that long list with the goals that they had in mind in the 1970s. So did they correct the plaque out front, or does the plaque in front reflect the plaque that they wanted to correct? The one that we had that's out up front right now.
So yeah, actually, the only thing they mentioned about correcting was the fact that they had Dr. Samuel Herman on there instead of just Samuel Herman. But so now is the one that they wanted. But as you know, Anastasia, we would like to update that even more now to include more of the more about not just the Samuel Herman building the house, because we know in fact that William Brand, who was the architect builder, did own dozens of enslaved people, and some of those were very skilled bricklayers. So that's one of the things that we're working on, as you know, in some of our grant proposals and things. But something we'd like to do is update the plaque again. And so
thank you.
It's always a work in progress.
Exactly. Historic houses usually are. So the next question from the audience, can you please refresh my memory Are we able to tour the second floor of Hermann-Grima? And if so, how many of the rooms? And thank you for the wonderful lecture.
Great. Yeah, I did want to talk a little bit more about like the phases that they opened everything, but there's just so much information to give. I was trying to keep it. So yeah, the second floor is opened, and the second floor, I think I mentioned, there's the room and the when you walk up the stairs to the far to the front of the house on the left to the Dauphine Street side is actually a room that we have interpreted as it was in the mid 20th century as the women's exchange. We call it the women's exchange, the exchange room. And it actually has furniture from the Whitney family that they donated a bunch of 19th century, mid 19th century furniture in the 20s. So it's kind of these different layers. So they donated 19th century furniture in the 1920s for the boarding house. And now we are going back and interpreting that with like with a modern lamp in there and a modern like hot pot and things like that. So yeah, you can tour the second floor. We haven't quite gotten to the third floor. I don't know if I'm going to open that up, but you can tour pretty much every other part of the house and come and see us.
Thank you. Thank you. So as we come to a close, sort of the last comment, we don't have any more questions. Thank you all. So we're all out of time for questions, but I'll make this sort of final comment and have the speakers maybe comment on that. So one of the things that was fascinating about both of you all's sort of talks was the mention of, like, for example, Danielle, you mentioned this building watchers tours, and they used to get on this bus and like literally drive around. And Katie, you also mentioned one of the earlier board members used to like ride around, and apparently that was the best way to you know, have this historic preservation movement, as you talked about. I love the phrase hyper local organic movements, Danielle. So can you all talk about how could we as like modern people, can we do that now? Do you all do, first of all, does the PRC, do you all do that? I know you all have a program, but like, what can we as modern day people, what can we do? Is that still legit? Can we ride around and talk about and take pictures and stuff? Yes. So can you all speak a little bit about how, if you wanted to like join the movement right now in this digital age, how could we do it? Like, is it still relevant to just ride around in your car and be like, hey, and then if so, who do you send this information to once you snap a picture?
Okay, so
I like walking.
Yes, walking and driving. People send us pictures every day, Anastasia, every day that they are walking in their neighborhood or they're driving down the street and they notice something that is clearly inappropriate happening to a building, and they will take a picture of it and they'll send it to us. It's so funny to think about these tours in the time before social media. You know, I'm kind of an analog person despite all this digital technology we have now. But Instagram has been an incredible tool for us. We have grown our Instagram following to over 30,000 people. Oh. And it has been so powerful for advocacy issues in particular. There was a house uptown last year by the universities that a family wanted to tear down. It was a 1920s home. It had recently been fully restored, so it was in perfect condition, but they wanted to tear it down, and they also wanted to tear down a 1920s apartment building that was next door, really charming, like Mediterranean revival little apartment building. They wanted to tear both of those down so that they could build an estate for themselves on these two lots. And we were livid about it, and so we posted information about that request that was coming before the city council on our Instagram account. We got over 1,000 likes and comments, and people did as we asked. We asked people to physically email that council member with their comments, and they were so inundated with letters that I got a call from the council person about the issue, I think 2 days later. So that is the power, that is harnessing the power of our new digital age to affect change and further historic preservation in a really powerful way.
Thank you so much. Katie,
Is
did
that
you?
the doubles to dorms?
I'm sorry.
No, but that's another
Oh,
one. That's
yeah.
very
I
specific.
live in the Carrollton neighborhood, and there's all these signs that say stop doubles to dorms, because they're turning the houses, you know, that might have 2 or 3 separate apartments or used to be one, into, you know, spots for 10 college kids to live in. So, so yeah, there was a question just about looking around now that.
Sure. No, if you don't have, like, did you want to add to that? It was just a question about what us modern day folks. So in our history at HGGHH, if our early board members were riding around in their cars to help, you know, sort of with these earlier preservation movements, what as if you were in this day and age, how could we join this preservation movement? And further, like, I guess, how could we support HGGHH or in general, the New Orleans modern day preservation movement?
Well, I mean, one of our things, like, and I also see this as kind of addressing one of the questions in the Q&A, but is kind of more community building for us in terms of like reaching a wider audience. Whereas we'd like to get more people, different types of people who aren't always like our we've had, you know, maybe a specific type of visitor, or only a few schools. Like, you know, as we've worked with a few schools, we're trying to really just to open up, get more people, different groups of people coming into the houses. And so I think engaging a lot of the different local communities is an important part. Getting people to tell their stories, like you said, the people telling about who lived at the house. If you know something, like, I think with social media, we, you know, trying to ask questions through social media about people's experiences. And you'll often be on a tour and somebody will say, oh, you know, my mom used to volunteer here then, and then it'll mention one little thing, and then it'll take us on a whole new exploratory kind of path, which I like to go down those. So I just think anytime you're interested in sharing memories of the houses or your experiences in the houses, what we're really trying to do is keep them alive through the history. So like I said, not only preserving the buildings and the fabric of the buildings and the architecture, but the lives of the people who were there and who visited and who worked and who were enslaved at the houses. So
Thank you. I just want to address one of the questions. This is the last question in the chat. I know we're over a tiny bit, but I did want to address it. The question is, what is the vision of the Hermann-Grima Gallier Historic Houses for interpreting the stories of enslaved people, the house builders, and other typically marginalized individuals connected with these sites? And I think that's an important question. And I can answer that question as the Director of Educational Programming here. We are doing a lot right now. We have a lot of things in the works. So 2 things that Katie mentioned throughout her talk. One thing was, we hope to change our plaques. So I actually have a calendar by the Equal Justice Initiative, and for the month of April, it talks about, they have little blurbs on it. It talks about the transatlantic slave trade. And I'll read a little blurb. It opened up with what the transatlantic slave trade was, and then it explicitly pointed out New Orleans. It said, New Orleans and many other communities along the eastern and southern coasts of North America, from Maine to New Jersey to Florida to Texas, were major ports of entry for ships like the Margaret. Many of these cities have done little to acknowledge or reckon with this history. And this is coming from a calendar printed from the Equal Justice Initiative. So how we're addressing that by changing our plaque. This is something that we hope to do. Anybody connected to funding out there, we would love a donation if you want to help us change our plaque. We would love to acknowledge both of our historic houses as sites of urban enslavement. So that's the first step that we're going to take. So that requires money. Please donate contact us if you'd like to pay for that plaque, because everything costs money. Like Katie was saying, they needed money. We have a fundraiser April 30th. Please come donate. So another thing that we got was we have an NEH grant funded, the National Endowment for Humanities, and it's talking about, the name of the project is Shifting Landscapes, Labor and Mobility in New Orleans. And so we've gathered a team of scholars from around the country, and we are going to do a virtual tour of Gallier House, but that includes expanding our discussion of the enslaved that were there in the houses during that time, because Gallier House was right before the Civil War. So there were enslaved people, but of course the Galliers owned enslaved people before they moved to that Royal Street location. So that's how we're doing it. So we are constantly looking for funding. We are constantly trying to find ways to expand on that content. And if you have been watching any of our previous Gallier gatherings, you'll know that we are bringing speakers, and our content as it relates to marginalized people have been extremely diverse. And as far as collecting and reinterpreting, and we put on last year an African-American genealogy workshop. So we are doing so much to expand the interpretation and collecting of marginalized people that lived in, labored, and helped build the homes. So with that, I did want to add those few minutes. I know we're over, but thank you all for staying. But I did want you all to know that we have so many things in the works. And if you want to donate to help us expand our discussions, you can. But I will bid you all good evening. Thank you so much. I did wanted to address that answer, and
come take a tour.
Appreciate it. Come take a tour. We're open, you all, fully open. So come take a tour, and I can't wait to see you all.
Thank you.